He was in the outer room of the place now, sitting silently with the appalling Parnell among the clerks and orderlies. He looked more lost than usual, and younger than his 21 years, much too young to be deemed a competent officer. He was yawning a lot. I went up to him when the sergeant clerk called the Major over to sign something. "Look, Frank," I said in an undertone, "don't worry about this. This court has no standing at all. Raleigh hasn't the powers to convene it. The company is not on detachment. It's a complete farce. Just a bit of sabre-rattling." "Yes, I know," he said. "Can I see you afterwards, Jock?" "I'll come over to your section." The line tests could wait. I went into the inner room, a long, low affair lit by a single window and an unshaded bulb that pulsed slowly. Rowney stood up and swept me a bow. "Ah, Captain D.A. Watson, Royal Signals in person," he fluted. "Nice of you to look us up." "I always like to see how you administrators live." "Better than you long-haired scientists, I'll be bound." "Materially, perhaps. Spiritually, no." It was hard not to talk like this to Rowney. "Och, aye, mon, you may be na see far fra the truth." "Shall we get on, chaps?" the Major asked, in his on-parade voice. "Don't want to be all night over this." He opened a file and nodded to me. "Get Parnell in, will you?" I got Parnell in. He smelt hardly at all of drink. He proceeded to give an oral rendering of his earlier written report. Raleigh had passed me a copy. At the relevant time he, Parnell, had been explaining the convoy's route to the drivers. Then he had got into the cab of his usual lorry, the one carrying the cookhouse stuff, no doubt. Then they had moved off. Soon after arrival at the other end, Mr. Archer had said the charging engine was missing, and he, Parnell, must go back for it. Going back for it and returning empty-handed had taken 11 hours. In reply to questions, Parnell said yes, he had looked in the right place. No, nobody had been hanging about there. No, neither he nor, as far as he knew, anyone else had been detailed to look after the charging engine. And yes, he would wait outside. Archer came in, and probably did his best to salute the court smartly. The effort forced you to notice how badly he did it. He started on a rigmarole similar to Parnell's, then stopped abruptly and gazed at the Major. "Look, sir," he said, biting his lips, "can I put this quite simply?" Raleigh frowned. "How do you mean, Frank?" "I mean I lost the charging engine, and that's all there is to it. I should have made sure it was put on board and didn't. I just forgot. I should have gone round afterwards and had a look to make sure we'd left nothing behind, but I forgot. It's as simple as that. Just a plain, straightforward case of negligence and inefficiency, and all I can say is I'm very sorry." Rowney started to ask a question, but the Major restrained him. "Go on, Frank," he said softly. Archer seemed to be trembling. He said, "What makes me so ashamed is that I've let the company down, completely, and I don't see what I can do about it. There just isn't any way of putting it right. I don't know what to do. It's no use saying I'm sorry, I know that. I'll pay for the thing if you like. So much a month. Would that help at all? God, I am a fool!" By this time he was shaking a good deal and throwing his hands about. I wondered very much whether he was going to cry. When he paused, blushing violently, I glanced at the other members of the court. The head of the second-in-command was bent over the paper fastener he was playing with, but Raleigh was staring hard at Archer, and on his face was a blush that seemed to answer Archer's own. At that moment they looked, despite Raleigh's farcical moustache, equally young and very alike. I felt my eyes widen. Was that it? Did Raleigh enjoy humiliating Archer for looking young and unsure of himself, because he too at one time had been humiliated for the same reason? Hardly, for Raleigh was not enjoying himself now. Of that I was certain. Still holding his gaze, Archer burst out, "I'm so sorry to have let you down personally, Major Raleigh. That's what gets me, failing in my duty by you, sir, when you've always been so decent to me about everything, and backed me up and encouraged me." This last, at any rate, was a flagrant lie. Had it not been, Archer would not have been where he was now, and surely he must know he had lied. The Major turned his head away. Any questions, Jack?" "No, thank you, Major." "You, Jock?" "No, sir." The Major nodded. With his head still averted, he said, "All right. Thank you, Frank. Hang on a moment outside, will you? You can tell Parnell to get back to the section." Archer saluted and was gone. "Well, thanks a million for inviting me along to your little show, Major," Rowney said, stretching. "Plenty of the old drama, what? Strong supporting cast, and very ably produced, if I may say so." Ignoring him, Raleigh turned to me. "Well, Jock, what do you think?" "About what exactly, sir?" "Come on, man, we want to get this thing wrapped up. What finding? You're the junior member, and you give your views first." I gave the most militarily relevant of my views, and Rowney did the same. Within the next 20 seconds, the court had found that engine, charging 1260 watt, 1 on charge to Lieutenant F.N. Archer, Royal Signals, had been lost by that officer in circumstances indicating negligence. Lieutenant F.N. Archer, Royal Signals, was hereby reprimanded. So that was that. After an expressionless Archer had been acquainted with the findings and had left, I stopped at the door to chat to Rowney. I had never much cared for him, but I was grateful to him this afternoon for having in his own way given his opinion of the Major's little show. Out of the corner of my eye I saw Raleigh crumple up the Court of Inquiry documents and stuff them into his trouser pocket. Outside, in the thin sunshine, the three of us halted for a moment before dispersing. Raleigh's face took on a summarizing expression, with raised eyebrows and lifted lower lip. "If only he'd pull himself together," he said. "But—" 4. In Archer's section office and store, surrounded by piles of camouflage nets and anti-gas clothing, I apologized to him for having been a member of the court. He sat inattentively on a crate containing a spare teleprinter, finally rousing himself to take a cigarette off me and to say, "Funny thing about that charging engine, you know. One of the things about it was that it wouldn't go. It never had gone in living memory. And then the toolkit was missing and no spare parts. And it was obsolete anyway, so there was no use indenting for spares, so it never would have gone. Did you tell Raleigh that?" "Yes, he said it was irrelevant." "I see. Another funny thing was that the quartermaster's got one nobody wants in his store, surplus, in running order, with tools and a complete set of spares. The QM offered it me." "Did Raleigh say that was irrelevant too?" "Yes, it wasn't the one I'd lost, you see." "Oh, thanks very much, Corporal Martin. That's extremely kind of you." This was said to a member of Archer's section who had carried in a mug of tea for him, though not, I noticed, aggrievedly, one for me. Somewhere overhead aircraft could be heard flying eastward. Archer sipped his tea for some time. Then he said, "Not a bad act I put on, I thought, in front of that ragtime bloody Court of Inquiry. Sorry, I know you couldn't help being on it." "An act, then, was it?" "Of course, you owl. You didn't need to tell me the thing had no standing, but I had to pretend that I thought it had, don't you see, and behave like a hysterical schoolgirl." Archer was a good mimic, I reflected, but it was perhaps questionable whether any amount of ordinary acting talent could have produced the blushes I had seen. On the other hand, I had no way of knowing how deeply he had thrown himself into the part. "That was what Raleigh wanted," he went on. "If I'd stood up for my rights or anything, he'd just have decided to step up his little war of nerves in other ways. As it was, I think I even made him feel he'd gone too far. That crack about him always backing me up was rich, I thought. Well, we live and learn." Archer no longer looked lost, nor did he look particularly young. It was true, I thought, that the army would lick anyone into shape. You could even say that it made a man of you. I Spy Strangers. 1. Doing what's right. That's going to be the keynote of our policy. Honouring our obligations. Loyalty before self-interest. None of this letting our friends down when we think it's going to serve our turn. Not that it ever does in the end, of course. That type of thing. We can all see that from what happened pre-war. It was greed and selfishness got us into that mess,
Anyway, coming down to details a bit now. First, Europe."
The Foreign Secretary, a tall young man whose schoolmasterly and rather slovenly air did not rob him of a certain impressiveness, glanced over at the tanned, neatly moustached face of the opposition's spokesman on defence questions. It was from this quarter that real difficulty was to be expected, not from the Foreign Affairs spokesman, let alone from the leader of the opposition. For a moment the Foreign Secretary quailed. More than one member of the government he knew found his policies absurd or extravagant rather than extremist, and would gladly see him humiliated. He knew too that other, less overtly political reasons for this attitude were widespread on both sides of the House, and in the visitors' gallery. The temptation to play safe was strong, but he must resist it. He could not have it said that he had covered up his real programme with comfortable platitude. That was what they had always done. "In Europe," he went steadily on, "we're going to go all out for cooperation and friendship with the Soviet Union. France too, naturally, but the state France is in these days, it'll be a long time before she's ready to play her full part in world affairs. It's obvious the lead's got to come from ourselves and the Russians. So first of all, we have a system of guarantees of small countries done between us. That is, Britain and the Soviet Union get together and say they'll clobber anyone who tries to walk into Austria and Czechoslovakia and Poland and Greece and Albania and all those places. And really clobber him, not just notes and protests and sanctions. We're not going to have it like it was last time. Then there's self-determination. That means everybody's got to have their own country and their own government. Nobody under foreign domination. Now I'll just take one example and show the type of thing I have in mind." He took his one example. It was Poland, not because he thought it was an example, good or bad, of anything in particular, but because he had not long ago read a short book on recent Polish history, and, as was his habit, made notes on it. These supplied him now with many an unfamiliar name and obscure fact, made him sound like a bit of an expert on Poland, and by implication, he hoped, on politics in general. After an account of post-1918 events in Eastern Europe, he leant heavily on Poland's outmoded system of land tenure, the anti-democratic utterances of its government in exile, and the Warsaw workers' resistance in 1939 and since. He had got a lot of this off by heart and was able to look round the debating chamber. 2 opposition backbenchers were ostentatiously playing cards. Conversations were muttering away here and there, and the Chancellor of the Exchequer was apparently asleep. But on the whole there seemed to be the right kind of semi-attentiveness. At least 2 people were taking everything in. They were the Speaker, whom the Foreign Secretary instinctively distrusted, but of whose basic progressivism there could be little real doubt, and the Parliamentary Under-Secretary to the Home Office, whose brilliant brown eyes stared disconcertingly into his. Did anything ever happen as it should? For months he had been wishing with all his heart that the Under-Secretary would look at him like that one day, but now that it seemed to have come about he felt none of the sudden joy and confidence he had expected. All he got was a jolt in the nerves which caused his mind to skip a groove or two, so that he found himself implying pretty unambiguously in the next sentence he uttered that the building of the Rosnow Dam had been an act of irresponsible provocation, justifying to the hilt the Russian invasion of Finland. This evidently went unnoticed. The Foreign Secretary, judging his audience to be adequately softened up by abstruse information, modulated to an account statistically supported of German atrocities in Poland. This led to a more lyrical passage on the theme of Russo-Polish brotherhood in arms, followed by a carefully worded suggestion that Russia had earned the right to get things set up her way at her end of Europe. Next, a designedly short paragraph on the Americans, in which protestations of admiring gratitude meant to fool nobody, introduced the message that to have fought for the liberation of a continent brought with it no automatic right to a say in its future, and that the sooner the Yanks realized this and cleared off back to their own half of the world, the better for everyone. There was some show of applause here on both sides of the house, and a voice from the visitors' gallery was heard to say that the fellow was talking a bit of sense at last. Mildly encouraged, trying not to look at the Under-Secretary to the Home Office, the Foreign Secretary turned to a fresh page of his notes. "Next, the Middle East," he said. Immediate uproar broke out in all parts of the chamber.
Those who had managed, without apparent protest, to sit through a deluge of information about the Silesian coal fields, found they could not contemplate further lessons on the break-up of the Ottoman Empire, or, it might be, the average weekly take-home pay of the Egyptian fellaheen. The Prime Minister felt it his duty to intervene. "Turn it up, Hargy," he called. "You've had nearly 20 minutes now. Give the other lot a go, eh?" The Foreign Secretary addressed the Speaker. "What do you say, Mr. Archer?"
"Well," the Speaker glanced to and fro, "I think we might split this up a bit, don't you? Sort of debate parts of it at a time. How much more stuff have you got there?"
"About as much again, sir." There was a general groan and some shouts of "Shame!" "Order! Order!" the Speaker said, blushing slightly.
"I think, if you don't mind, Hargreaves, we might hold the rest of your speech for now. Let's hear from Sergeant... Sorry. I now call upon the Leader of the Opposition."
This personage, the left breast of whose uniform bore several campaign medal ribbons, turned and exchanged energetic whispers with his colleagues. After a time he stopped shaking his head violently and started nodding it feebly. Like many another political leader, he owed his position less to talent, or even ambition, than to a group of deficiencies: lack of general unpopularity, of immoderate enthusiasms, of firm views about anything. Sergeant Fleming helped his officers without taking their part in their absence, fiddled the store's inventory, but not the leave roster, never stood the company quartermaster sergeant more than one extra drink an evening, helped to carry his passed-out mates to their billets, and then dropped them on the floor. A natural, middle-of-the-road man, Fleming, and equally naturally a Tory through and through. Or perhaps just through. Nobody had thought of questioning his nomination as titular head of the alternative to a government that extended, Popular Front fashion, from the Trotskyist at the Colonial Office to the Moral Rearmament International Christian Democrat, who had found himself Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. Fleming's head was nodding faster now, though no less feebly, in fact slightly more so. He got up and said loudly and indistinctly, "Well, we've heard what my learned friend, that is the Foreign Secretary, what he'd had to say about what he thinks ought to be done about foreign countries and that, and I must say I've never heard such a load of rubbish in all my born days. It beats me that a so-called educated man with all his intelligence can talk all that rubbish. What do we care about all these Poles and French? They let us down, didn't they? No, we've got to look after ourselves, because there's nobody else will. Break them all up into small states so's they can't start anything. That's the only way. Eh? All right, Bert. Well, I'm going to give you our military expert now, because you've got to keep the peace, haven't you? That's the first thing. So I'll hand you over now to Sergeant Dole." The military expert's military aspect was half misleading. He was in the army, all right, but the shape and condition of his moustache, the unnecessary presence round his waist of a splendidly furbished webbing belt, the very knot of his khaki necktie, suggested the officers' mess at some exclusive armoured car regiment of incessantly invoked Lancer or Hussar ancestry, rather than the orderly room at an unemployed half-unit of the Royal Corps of Signals. Dole's extreme efficiency behind the sergeant's desk in that orderly room was perhaps what had led him, in compensation, to adopt this heavily martial persona. If so, he would only have been acting out on an individual and more symbolic scale the compulsion, born of the inferiority feelings common to all technical troops, that had afflicted his superiors during the period of training in England. All present could very well remember the cross-country runs, the musketry competitions, the 3-day infantry tactics schemes with smoke bombs and a real barrage, the 12-mile route marches in respirators, which had seemed in retrospect to show such a curious power of inverted prophecy, when the unit finally completed its role in the European theatre of war without having had to walk a step or fire a shot. One of the most convinced proponents of these early rehearsals for death or glory was at the moment sitting in the visitors' gallery, with a hard expression on his soft face. He was Major R. W. Raleigh, the commander of a communications company until just after the German surrender, and now, the bulk of the unit having departed to help furnish signal facilities at the Potsdam Conference, the overlord of a sort of dispirited rump. This, originally comprising most of his old company, with the addition of a spare section from the cable-laying company, had been swollen by successive injections administered by higher authority. In the chaos of disbandments, postings, reformations, and moves to the United Kingdom that characterized the aftermath of the campaign, a command like the Major's represented a handy point of stabilization, a nucleus for any sort of drifting particle. Expansion, once begun, had been rapid. Daily erosions took place, as a corporal with one set of qualifications or 3 signalmen with another suffered removal for eventual use in the Far East, but these were far more than redressed by reinforcements. At one time or another, and with or without warning, there had arrived a further cable-laying section that had proved superfluous at Potsdam, most of the small but variegated signals formation lately serving a now demolished independent parachute regiment, half a base company without any officers or sergeants, an entire technical maintenance section without any transport or stores, and 2 or 3 dozen teleprinter operators, lineman mechanics, drivers, electricians, and fitters who had turned up individually or in little groups. All this amounted to a ration strength of something like 12 officers and 400 other ranks, a total quite impressive enough to justify such gestures as renaming the original company office the Orderly Room and starting to refer to Sergeant Doll, the chief clerk in that office, as the Orderly Room Sergeant. The Major thought of Doll as a useful lad, and never more so than this evening. A certain amount of undisciplined behaviour, of affected intellectual nonsense, even of actual hints of disloyalty to the country, these were to be expected of a mock parliament, but there was surely no need for the thing to turn out quite so mock as it had. The blokes seemed to think that they could simply get up and say whatever they liked. Where that sort of attitude got you had been made all too clear at the previous sitting, when the bunch of jokers who called themselves the government had brought in their nationalisation bill. This meant, apparently, that they were in favour of collaring the coal mines, the steel industry, transport, public services, everything that created wealth and employment, and running them as they saw fit. That could never happen in the real world, in England, but the Major could not agree with his friends in the officers' mess that the passing of that bill merely showed how idiotic the whole issue had become. He wished he could. No, it was far more serious than that, the indication of a really ugly mood. He had too much sense of responsibility not to have come along tonight to keep an eye on things, use his influence to stop them getting out of hand. He hoped he would not have to intervene. It would not be necessary if Doll did his stuff properly, and Doll surely would. Reliable fellow, Doll, even if he was a bit of a puzzle. That perpetual parade ground appearance and manner, what was it all in aid of? Whatever the complications of Doll's internal drives, he was not a middle-of-the-road man. Indeed, to extend the image a trifle, he was brushing up against the wall on the right-hand side. In the melodious voice that had served him so well as complaints supervisor at a large store in Leeds, he was saying, "I shan't waste much time in destroying the dangerous nonsense we've just been exposed to. Russia has always been an aggressive power, and always will be unless we stop her. All that restrained the Reds until 1939 was weakness. Then they went for the Baltic republics, Poland, Finland, plus various Balkan adventures. Their only interest in self-determination is to prevent it, desertions to the Nazis included. I beg your pardon?" "Facts!" the Foreign Secretary was shouting above the speaker's half-hearted appeals for order. "This is all just insinuation. You haven't—" "Facts?" The spokesman on defence questions brought out his own notebook, then went on as mellifluously as before. "All right, facts. From the Times of June 29th. Czechoslovakia signed Ruthenia over to Russia. Why? Because the Czechs wanted to get rid of it. From a BBC broadcast this morning. Russia is putting pressure on Turkey to revise their Black Sea Straits Treaty and cede 2 territories to her. Why? Because the Turks are planning to blockade her. From another broadcast. 300 more Poles shot by the order of peoples.
They were traitors, collaborators. They've been...
I've no doubt many of them were, but we shall never know now, shall we? These people should have been tried by an international court. As we've said, It was the heat of the moment. You always get... As I started to tell you, these were executions carried out under sentences passed by people's courts. There wasn't just a mob blazing away in the streets. But I really must appeal to you, Mr. Speaker, to quell these interruptions. I managed to keep quiet while all that red propaganda was going on, so I don't see why... All right, Sergeant Doll. Hargreaves, I must warn you to keep quiet. There was reluctance and a half-buried sympathy in the speaker's tone. Sorry, sir, but I've simply got to ask him about the Polish elections. Surely that proves... Order, Hargreaves. You'll have to shut up or leave. Yes, sir. The house resettled itself rather sulkily, feeling and muttering that it was always the bloody same. The moment you got a decent row going, some pernickety sod piped up with some moan about order. Might as well be sitting in the billet reading last week's paper. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Dole stared across at Hargreaves. As a matter of fact, I welcome the opportunity of saying something about those elections. I find it rather odd that the Reds should be so keen to get those elections held at this stage, with the country still in turmoil. But then it'll be all right, really, won't it, with the Reds everywhere to see fair play? No undemocratic interference from us, or the French, or the Yanks, that might result in free elections, because the wrong people might get elected then, mightn't they? Can't have that, can we? Comrade Stalin wouldn't like that. I should like to round off this question with a few words on the Warsaw Rising, and the Reds' unfortunate inability to come to the aid of their Polish brothers in arms. In the spring of this year, Hargreaves had lost all the poise that might have been expected of a Foreign Secretary, even a mock one. He leant forward on the heavy, scarred wooden bench and put his head in his hands. If only he knew more and could think faster. If only he had at his side, as living proof that Dole was wrong, one or other of the fine men and women he knew on his local Labour Party branch committee, people who had grown up in the service of socialism and given it all their spare energy, fighting in Spain, leading hunger marches, canvassing in hopelessly impregnable Tory strongholds. He tried not to think of all that going to waste, failing ever to find its way to power. His almost continuous excitement over the results of the British general election, due to be announced the following week, froze momentarily into despair. Contrary to what everyone thought, he had never been a member of the Communist Party. He was suspicious of the one-party system, and his doubts about the Russian labour camps still lingered. But if Dole's ideas carried the day at home, there was only one logical step to take. Hargreaves was enough of a Marxist to recognise a situation in which the left must combine against the main enemy. To have taken this half-decision brought him no relief. On tonight's showing he was politically useless. His obvious dejection was not lost on Major Raleigh, whose soft face had softened somewhat since Dole began to put things in the right perspective, and who was now leaning back in his chair in search of what degree of comfort it could provide. This was not great. Like everything else in the room, it seemed to have been made without reference to human use. Typical German unimaginativeness, the Major thought to himself. The small oblong windows, through which a strong late-evening sun was pouring, were set too high in the wall to be properly seen out of, certainly by most of the children who until recently had attended prayers here, sung Nazi songs or whatever it was they did in their school hall. 2 rows of flat-topped desks had been dragged out of an adjacent storeroom to form the government and opposition front benches. It would have taken a long-torsoed boy or girl to work at one with any ease, or even see fairly over it, and the design demonstrably called for a far shorter-legged man than the average mock parliamentarian currently in occupation. 2 rows of flat-topped desks had been dragged out of an adjacent storeroom to form the government and opposition front benches. It would have taken a long-torsoed boy or girl to work at one with any ease, or even see fairly over it, and the design demonstrably called for a far shorter-legged man than the average mock parliamentarian currently in occupation. The Major brooded for a time upon Hargreaves and the many things that could be done with or to him to make him less all-embracingly unsatisfactory.
failing which some positive enactment of how the world in general felt about him would do him good. The things available to the Major ranged from giving Hargreaves an extra duty for being unshaven, any and every day would do, to getting him transferred elsewhere. An influential contact in the relevant department at General HQ was in the habit of seeing to it that, to a large extent, the Major was able to decide who should and who should not be posted out of his command. There was only one place where, after a brief break in the United Kingdom, Hargreaves would finally be sent. A very hot and distant place, full of stuff which would interest him, and which, as a budding expert on world affairs, he could not afford not to know about. In one of his rare moments of self-contemplation, brought on by slight uneasiness over the impending election result, the Major had started wondering about the morality of dispatching junglewood anybody under his authority who had happened to annoy him. The moment had sped harmlessly by when he remembered that, to an experienced and conscientious officer, such as he trusted he was, men who annoyed him were certain to be, corresponded 100% with, men who were bad soldiers. It did not worry him that he was thus filling the relevant units of Southeast Asia Command with drunks, incompetents, homosexuals, communists, ration vendors, and madmen. His first duty was to the formation he led. Thoughts of the Japanese campaign naturally led him to consider another person who was going the right way about getting to it soon, Lieutenant F.N. Archer. Sometime defendant in a celebrated unconstitutional court of inquiry staged by the Major in an only half-successful attempt to humiliate him, was now scowling openly at what Doll was saying. Archer sat in a tall, ecclesiastical-looking throne affair, much carved with Gothic lettering, at the far end of the room for the visitors' gallery. This was no gallery, but a simple row of hard chairs at floor level. The real gallery, over the oak doorway, had not suited the Major, who still resented Archer's original attempt to make him and his friends sit up there as if they were nothing to do with the proceedings. It had been just like Archer not to see that it was absurd to try and reproduce the House of Commons set up in details like that. Not seeing the obvious was his speciality, as his regimental work showed. To have appointed him Speaker of this fandango had probably been a mistake, but then he was the one who was always showing off his political knowledge in the mess. A fat lot that had amounted to. His voice sounding hollow in the barely furnished room, Doll said, "But before that we must immediately negotiate a peace with Japan, while she still has some sort of military machine left. We're going to need every ship and plane and man they have. A settlement wouldn't be difficult. They're talking about peace already. Nobody really cares who owns these islands. It's the bases that count, and with a common enemy, that'd soon sort itself out." "What about the Chinese?" the Postmaster General asked. He was a corporal of dispatch riders from the parachute formation, one of the few recent arrivals who had taken part in the Parliament. Doll never smiled, but cordiality enhanced his tones when he answered, "An excellent question. I think the Japs, with their reduced bargaining power, could probably be bullied into making enough concessions to the Chinks to keep them quiet. Certainly the Yanks have got quite enough cash to bribe the nationalist Chinks, Shang's lot, into selling their little yellow souls. The red Chinks are more of a problem, though they won't amount to much for a good while yet. I think there's a fair chance they could be bought off too, into some sort of tacit neutrality anyway. But the real problem is Europe. The thing there is to advance until we're stopped. We stop wherever they start shooting, and they won't do that for a bit. We push into Czechoslovakia and Hungary and the Balkans and southern Poland, if we can get there, until we're stopped. Then we dig in. They can't have troops everywhere. Later on we straighten the line by agreement with the Reds. It's our only chance of saving any of these people, to fight on our side later, if necessary. We'll need troops for that, of course, to dig in and stay there. Demobilization must be halted at once. 28 days leave in the UK for everybody we can spare, then back on the job. No Yanks are going home if I have anything to do with it. They're all needed here. Reform the French, Dutch, Belgian and Italian armies, and the Germans, as many of those boys as we can get. It does seem a pity we spent so much energy killing so many of them, doesn't it? when if we'd gone in with them when they asked us in 1941, we'd have smashed the Reds between us by now. But we'll leave that for the time being. We'll have to put the Nazi Party back on its feet, by the way. They understand these things. Perhaps old Adolf will turn up from wherever he is and give us a hand. We could use him. Well, that's about it. Keep them nattering away in Potsdam as long as possible, and move like hell meanwhile. I think it would probably work. Everybody's exhausted, but our manpower and resources are superior. What we almost certainly haven't got is the will. That's their strong suit. In conclusion, let me just say formally that in foreign affairs the first policy of my party is resistance to communism. Dole sat down, having finished his speech, a rare achievement in this chamber. There was a lot of applause, most of it based on close attention to what had been said. Nodding his head to the pair of gloomy subalterns who sat beside him, the Major joined judiciously in. He knew he was supposed to be impartial, but really there could be no question but that the whole thing was on the right lines, except perhaps for the bit about the Nazi Party, which was premature to say the least. His speculations why Dole had never put in for a commission were interrupted by the Foreign Secretary, who clattered to his feet and cleared his throat in a long bellow. Hargreaves's normally mottled face was flushed. Parts of his scrubby hair stuck out horizontally. His chest rose and fell. "Could I ask, first of all," he said in a trembling voice, "if the honourable member imagines that any British government would put into effect the policy he outlines?" Dole's stare was not unfriendly. "Oh, no. That's to say, almost certainly not. They'd be turned out as soon as the electorate realised what they'd let themselves in for. You'd be asking people to admit in effect that they'd been fighting on the wrong side, you see, and having their relatives killed doing it. And they're tired, too. No, I'd say the chances—" "Then what the hell? I mean, what's the point of—" "The point? The point of what we're doing, as I see it, is to work out what we think we should do, not what the government we elect probably will do. If we're all just playing a guessing game, then I think I'm with you. You'll very likely get what you want, especially if the country's fool enough to elect those socialist prigs. I only hope you enjoy it when you find out what it's really like." "Mr. Speaker, sir," Hargreaves cried, and he was looking directly at Archer, "I never thought to sit in this house, which exists only with the traditions of that other house across the sea, sir, and hear an honourable member admit to an admiration for the Nazi Party, which has been responsible for so many dreadful crimes, and which, the German army, I mean, we've been fighting it all these years, and now I hear this said, or perhaps he now wishes to—" "I didn't admit to an admiration for the Nazi Party, and I would never do so. Their racial policy was against reason, and their appeal was based on mass hysteria. No, I was only arguing that in a desperate situation like ours, you need all the allies you can get, especially if they can organise and fight. That we all know the Nazis can do." "No wonder you want the Nazis. You're an aggressor. You want to aggress. You want to attack the Russians. The people who've died in their millions to stop the Nazis from conquering the world. Honestly, how insane can you—" The Foreign Secretary's voice tailed off. The House was perfectly silent, crossing its fingers with the wish that no pernickety sod was going to invoke order. Dole said efficiently, "The Nazis could never have conquered the world. There were too few of them, and they were confined to one country. The Reds are an international conspiracy, and my proposals were entirely defensive. What interests me is resistance to communism, as I said, not an assault on it. It's too early for that, or too late. There's only been one assault on it in our lifetime, and it failed because we were too stupid to join in. And now perhaps somebody else might care to—" "Fascist!" Hargreaves screamed. "The strong arm that's the thing for you, isn't it? The jackboot, the good old truncheon. I know your sort, Dole. There are people like you in England all over, in the bloody Empire, Africa and India, smooth as buggery in the club with the old brandy and soda, and then off to break a strike or flog a wog, or— You're all the same, and everybody who clapped you." His unblinking glance swept the chamber, meeting the Major's eyes for a moment. "Ought to be ashamed of yourselves. Black and tan material. You're going to lose. You're on the side of death. History'll get you. Auden warned you, but you never listened. I won't even sit in the same room with you."
Sincere emotion enforces a hearing. Hargreaves had almost reached the impressive exit doorway, no more than 20 years old, but to an English eye redolent of weighty Teutonic medievalism, before comment and protest got properly going. Doll smoothed his abundant straight black hair. Archer and the parliamentary under-secretary to the Home Office gazed with similar expressions after the retreating Hargreaves. The Major blew his nose and tucked the pale tan silk handkerchief into the sleeve of his battle-dress blouse. His soft face concealed emotion at the hardly won memory — he did not care to blur with too much detail his faculty for making quick decisions — that Archer was Hargreaves's section officer, and as such responsible for everything he did. 2. "Anything special for me this morning, Wilf?" Major Raleigh hung up his service-dress hat, which, in defiance of his own edict, he regularly wore with battle-dress, on the fist-sized bronze knob of the bookcase door. Behind the glass of this, apart from a couple of dozen battered books in a foreign language or two, there huddled a heap of painted china vases and ewers, which the Major thought might be 18th century or 19th century, or one of those. He had collected them from various houses and shops in the area, and sometimes wondered what to do with them. Captain Cleaver looked listlessly at a pad on his table. "I don't think so, Major. There's the pay to collect." "Get one of the cable wallers to go. Time they did something to earn their living." "Well, it's a trip, you know, Major." "So much the better." "No, I was thinking somebody might like to go. Get out of the place for a bit." "Oh, I see what you mean. Go yourself, if you like, Wilf." "Well, actually, I was hoping to look in at the officer's shop, if you're not going to need me here. That's in the opposite direction to the cashier." "Ask that parachute chap, then, Pinch or Finch or whatever his name is. He's been looking a bit down in the mouth." "Winch? Yes, he has, hasn't he? He must feel a bit of a fish out of water here. Nothing going on. It must have been a bit different at Arnhem. All that excitement. Pretty hectic, too, though. I expect he misses that, don't you?" "What?" The Major, at his in-tray, stared up over his reading glasses. They made him look ineffectively studious, like a neglected schoolboy at a crammer's. "Mrs. what?" "You know, the excitement and the big bangs and so on at Arnhem. I was asking you if you thought he was missing it." "Who?" "Winch, the parachute chap." "How the hell should I know what he's missing and what he isn't missing? And he wasn't at Arnhem. I asked him. Got taken off the drop at the last minute because of dysentery." "I understood him to say—" "He wasn't on the Normandy drop either." "Well, he wouldn't have been, would he? Normandy was 6th Airborne. Arnhem was 1st. "Yes. Look, Wilf, if you're going to the officer's shop, there are a couple of things you might pick up for me, if you would." "Certainly, Major, of course." Cleaver turned to a fresh page of his pad, pleased at the chance of writing something down, and poised his pencil devotedly. "Now then, what can I do for you?" "Half a dozen handkerchiefs, the silk ones. Don't seem to be able to get anything ironed round here. 3 pairs of the light-weight socks, size 8 shoe, not the elastic tops. If there's only the elastic tops, don't get anything. Ties? No, I'm all right for those." The Major appeared to fall into a muse. Cleaver said, "Anything else, Major?" "Hold on, I'm thinking. These American shirts. Has he got any left, do you know?" "Well, he's probably got some more in by this time. He said he was getting some more in." "Make sure they're the same. The same as I'm wearing now, see? You're not looking?" "I am, honestly, sir. I know the sort." "Make sure the collar's the same. Get me 3 of them. 15½ neck." "Right." "Just a moment." The Major fondled his throat, his blue eyes bulging as he tried to see what he was doing. "Better say 16 to be on the safe side. I'll settle up with you when you see what you've got, okay?" "Right, Major. Oh, by the way, I meant to tell you—" "What?" "A message came over the blower from Movement Control in Hildesfeld. Just an advance warning. There'll be a teleprint through this afternoon with all the griff. A platoon of the Montgomeryshire Light Infantry are moving into the area sometime tomorrow, and we're to help them find accommodation.
They were supposed to be doing guard duty at one of the DP camps, but it closed down a couple of days ago, and so there's nowhere for them to...
But it's not our responsibility to fix them up. They're not signals. Raleigh spoke with an anxious severity, as if conceivably the platoon referred to might turn out to be the one in which someone very dangerous to him was serving, someone who had seen him cheating at piquet or torturing a prisoner.
I know, but that's not what they're on about. These people will come under the admin company in the ordinary way. It's just that, well, the staff captain in Hildesfeld seemed to think that with our knowledge of the area we could be pretty useful to these MLI types. Know where to look and save them time. Just lend them an officer and a sergeant for a day or so. Nobody at movement control who do, and if there were, they couldn't spare him. They run off their feet there.
The Major hardly heard the last part of this. In the weeks since the war ended, even more since the larger part of the unit had gone to Potsdam, he had been possessed and tormented by dreams of triumph, renown, or at least advancement. One of these, which he never visualized with full conscious attention, was about a local Nazi uprising crushed by him in a single prompt and ruthless blow. Another, disguised as an unuttered joke, involved the removal with ignominy of the CO as a chief executive of communications at Potsdam, and the immediate substitution of himself. "Where's Raleigh? Get hold of Raleigh. There's only one man for this job, and that's Dick Raleigh." Dreams 3 and 4 engaged him more continuously, if less profoundly. 3 he had taken what steps he could to bring to life. In the last month he had written 3 demi-official memoranda to the Signals General at Army Group Headquarters. Their theme was that if the war against Japan lasted long enough, there would probably be a role in it for a new full-dress headquarters signals unit, and that the body of troops at present under his command, admittedly miscellaneous, but in a high state of training, could with advantage be used as the basis of such a unit. He himself, he had pleaded, could ask for nothing better than to stay on in uniform past the date of his expected release, indeed indefinitely, if he could be allowed to serve as its leader. The first memorandum had been acknowledged with the utmost formality, the others not at all. As each day brought no word from Army Group HQ, and as news of Japanese reverses mounted, the Major fell back increasingly on his 4th dream. This had been put into his head by the compulsions of military geography. The medium-sized village in which he and his men were living had turned out to lie within administrative reach of a smallish but important railhead, the one at Hildesfeld. The movement control people there were faced with the task of propelling personnel westward about 3 times faster than their resources allowed. The accumulating residue had to be put somewhere. The Major's village and its environs were an obvious lodgment for it. The Major had taken it upon himself to provide communications between the railhead and the tankless tank troops, the gunless artillery sections, the reconnaissance detachments with nothing in Europe left to reconnoitre, all those whom destiny or administrative whim had transmitted in this general direction. If this situation continued, authority would have to recognize it. A different type of man from the Major might have noticed an analogy with the experiences of an ex-colonial territory on the threshold of statehood. As things were, he simply saw himself as an area commandant with a lieutenant colonelcy to match. Only one officer of this rank was known to be living hereabouts, a youthful engineer on 24-hour warning of departure, who was rumoured to divide his time between drinking schnapps in a farmhouse bedroom and driving round the countryside looking for more. This at a speed which suggested that death might remove him before officialdom could. Of the 5 or 6 local majors, inquiry showed that Raleigh was senior to 3 and had been around the place longer than any. Lieutenant Colonel R.W. Raleigh, R. Siggs, sounded authentic. So did Winkworth West Conservative Association Chairman Colonel Richard W. Raleigh. "All right, Wilf," the Major said. "I'll take care of it. Was there anything else?" "About the shop again, sir. I take it would be all right to get a few things for 1 or 2 of the blokes while I'm there?" The Major frowned. It was his Major's frown, his responsibility-invoking frown, his slackness-detecting frown, his extra-duty-donating frown. He kept it on full for a while before he said, I'm not sure that's a very good idea." "Oh, I don't see why not. Things are pretty relaxed these days. We're not at war any more, after all. I can't see it doing anybody much harm." "I wouldn't go all the way with you there, old boy. While the blokes have got so much time on their hands, it's particularly important to maintain discipline. It doesn't help at all throwing shoes and ties and what-not around indiscriminately. This is an officer's shop we're talking about, not a natty gent's tailoring establishment. Why do you think officers and men are required to dress differently? To emphasize the difference in their status, of course. That's quite fundamental." "I know, Major." Cleaver was being uncharacteristically persistent. "But it's going on all over the place, you see. Only yesterday I saw a couple of the lads on the switchboard wearing those jeep coats, the sort with the—" "They're in Archer's lot. I've already had a word with him about it. There's a great deal too much of this all chums-together spirit around these days, and I don't like it. It isn't healthy. Anyway, who were you thinking of getting stuff for?" "Well, evidently Doll could do with a couple of shirts, and the quartermaster sergeant was talking about a few pairs of shoes. He didn't say who he wanted them for, and then my batman was asking—" The Major's frown, which had almost cleared, came back again, but with a difference that indicated that thought of some description was going on behind it. "That's rather different. Doll knows this sort of thing is a privilege, and he's not the kind of fellow to abuse it. The QMS has done a first-class job for everybody at a very difficult time. And, the Major might have added, a 5-star cordon bleu crossed knife and fork in the Michelin guide-type job for himself out of the petrol hunger of a chain of civilians that stretched back as far as Arromanches on the Norman coast. And if he needs a pair of shoes or two, I don't think it's really up to us to question it. As regards your batman, well, I regard that as a personal matter between the two of you. Batmen have always had these little perks. It's a tradition. Yes, that's all right, Wilf." "Thanks, Major." "You did quite right to tell me, though," Raleigh said emphatically, leaving the other in no doubt about its being quite wrong not to tell him in the future, and picked up a sheaf of vehicle returns. He knew full well what was on them, for the transport situation, like much else, had remained static for weeks, but the small effort involved in putting common knowledge into due form helped to keep the sections on their toes, or at any rate off their backsides. Cleaver cranked his telephone, and after a moment said, "Parachute section, please." "What? When was this?" "I see. Is anyone working on it?" "Well, let me know the moment it's back, will you?" "I say, Major." Raleigh looked up as if he had been deep in the vehicle returns for a day or so. "What is it?" "The line to the parachute people's out. Looks as if I'll have to go and tell Winch myself." "Winch?" "About the pay. We decided." Yes. Get Doll to send someone over. It's only a few 100 yards." While Cleaver again cranked his phone and spoke, the Major turned over his in-tray a second time, then got going on his own phone. "Give me the signal master." "Signal master?" "Signals Command Group here, Major Raleigh." "Who's that?" "Archer, sir." "Frank, what's happened to the morning summary of communications? It's supposed to be on my desk at 9 o'clock. Seated at his trestle table in the commodious and airy barn that housed the signal office, Archer blushed. "I sent it across, sir, nearly 2 hours ago." This inadvertent reminder of how long after 9 o'clock the Major had presumptively begun his morning's work did not go down well. "I don't care how long ago you think you sent it across, Frank. It isn't here." "There's only one thing on it, sir. The line to Parasec is down. Otherwise—" "I know that. That's not the point. You'd better have a look round there and then come over and talk to me about it. I want a word with you anyway." Sighing, Archer got to his feet and stretched. Inactivity reigned about him. A single teleprinter clattered away in one corner. A bespectacled corporal read a paperback novel in front of the wood and canvas rack in which transmitted messages were filed. The rack had been cleared at midnight, and now carried 6 exiguous batches of flimsy. The 2 counter-clerks were playing chess, while the orderly, an aged and delinquent Highland infantryman, watched them in wonder. The locations clerk was busy with his eraser, removing what must have been one of the last official traces of yet another defunct unit. Archer raised his voice. "Hargreaves!" Peering anxiously, laboriously pinching out a cigarette, Hargreaves hurried in from the open air. His battle-dress blouse, instead of lying open at the top to reveal a collar and tie, was buttoned up and hooked at the throat. He must have been one of the last men in the British Army to avail himself of the recent sartorial concession. No doubt the older style made fewer demands on his time and energy. "Yes, Mr. Archer," he said. "You took the summary of communications across to command group, didn't you?" "The what, Mr. Archer?" "That thing I gave you to take over to the Major's office. You took it, didn't you?" "Oh, yes. Captain Cleaver was there, and I gave it to him." "You're sure?" "Oh, absolutely, Mr. Archer." "You'd swear to that?" Archer smiled conspiratorially. "They're trying to make out over there that I never sent it. You'd stand by me if it came to a court-martial, wouldn't you?" Hargreaves looked worried. "I don't quite understand, Mr. Archer, but if there's any trouble you can count on me to—" "Never mind, Hargreaves, I was only pulling your leg. Good show you put up last night at the Parliament, by the way. I was meaning to tell you." "Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Archer. How kind of you. You don't think perhaps it was a bit extreme? You know, at the end." "Not a bit. You were quite justified. These people need to be talked to straight once in a while. You keep at it. Oh, and I thought that bit about Auden came in very well. I didn't know you were a fan of his." "I've just read a few of his things, sir." "I see." Archer became conscious that he had been smiling rather a lot. "Right. That's all, Hargreaves. Thank you." "Thank you, sir." On Archer's table lay a letter he had been writing to a friend of his in Oxford, one who, like most of his contemporaries, was medically unfit for military service, a doubly fortunate shortcoming in the present case, for one of this friend's several neuroses forbade him to be ordered about. The letter was full of undetailed assertions of hatred and misery, unsolicited news about what Archer's two girlfriends in England had been writing to him, and inquiries about issues of jazz records. He put on top of it the signal-master's diary. Its sole entry for the morning read 0840, on duty, F.N. Archer, Lieutenant, and told Sergeant Parnell, the superintendent, where he was going. Then he donned his ridiculous khaki beret and left. Outside, the sunlight was intense. Hargreaves was standing in the shade, leaning against the corner timber of the barn and talking to a switchboard operator called Hammond, who, among other things, was Parliamentary Under-Secretary to the Home Office. He gave Archer an inquisitive brown-eyed glance. Archer went down the yard, at one side of which a dispatch rider was dozing on a heap of straw, and crossed the cobbled street to the school building. He was thinking that the oddest thing about the Major, or about himself, was that Raleigh's behaviour was getting funnier all the time without arousing any laughter in him, Archer. Take Raleigh's unconcealed delight whenever a new formation moved into the area, and thus gave him another place to have a line run to and a telephone installed at, an amenity much resented by its beneficiaries, who would usually have spent most of the war too near a telephone and asked for nothing better than to remain incommunicable. The Major had almost got drunk, he never did quite, on the strength of having foisted a special dispatch run and a wireless link under a displaced person's area authority on the verge of closure.